Welcome to A Seat at the Table, a podcast for public service professionals by public service professionals. This podcast series is presented by Statewide Learning Services, a division of the Office of Management and Enterprise Services. In this episode, we extend a seat at the table to CAIR Executive Director Adam Soltani, Southern Nazarene University Director of Disability Tabitha Pope, and University of Oklahoma Director of Diversity and Inclusion Cordney McClain to share how they are putting inclusion, diversity, and equity into action in public service. So please, won't you take your seat at the table?
Born and raised in Oklahoma, Tabitha earned a BS in psychology and a MA in religious education from Oklahoma City University. At 21 years of age, she was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma tumor that paralyzed her face, leaving her unable to blink, hear, or smile on the left side. Once valued for her talents, she wondered who would hire her. After all, though she was perfectly capable, she was treated differently, now labeled by society as disabled and categorized as part of a protected class. Today, Tabitha is a distinguished Toastmaster active in her community and currently writing and speaking on an important topic for everyone, disability inclusion. She currently serves as the Disability Director at Southern Nazarene University and brings her experience working with individuals who have physical, mental, and/or learning disabilities. Welcome, Tabitha. Thank you so much for joining us. You've had a very interesting journey to your current position in public service. Can you tell me the story about the acoustic neuroma tumor you were diagnosed with and how that shaped your journey here today?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So my story is very interesting. I love this story. I get to tell it a lot. I was a vivacious young lady, and I was very privileged. I went to private schools, boarding schools, and the world was my oyster. And I go to Oklahoma City University, and my personality started spiraling, and people started seeing that I was not acting my normal self, and they were concerned. My family took me to a doctor, and within days, they had noticed that there was a mass on my brain, and so they went and they sat us down and they said that I had an acoustic neuroma and that they were going to schedule surgery that very next week as early as possible. What that did for me was it just was a turning point in my life, because there I was in college trying to get my bachelor's degree, trying to understand what a diagnosis was. When the doctor said, you're facing death, there's a percentage of chance that you're going to live. Sending me home, back to school, I didn't know what to do with that at 20 years of age. So it was very difficult, and I wanted just to try to hold on to some normalcy. And I sat there trying to do my work, but not able to really understand what was going on. So from that point, I ended up having the surgery. I came back to school, and I was very sick. I tried to do my work to the best of my ability, but because of the medication, because of post-op, because of the way people were, right? It was just like this blur. And I was trying to also perform and achieve academically. So it was this turning point in my life that I understood that things had radically changed and would never be the same again. And at that point, I was at a friend's house because I seemed to have lost a lot of friends, and I wasn't relating well to people, and they weren't relating to me very well. And my dear friend looked at me and she said, well, you understand that you're disabled now. And I was like, what is that? And she said, you're part of a protected class. You're going to be treated different. Things will never be the same. And that was the point where I understood that the human condition of getting sick or having a diagnosis, being chronically ill, or just something that's even invisible, right? Because I had the visible things that you could see, but the invisible was also there. And now I was labeled, and everything was going to be radically different. So that's how I got started on my journey. And I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I'll quickly say that I kind of found my own little place, and I became very isolated. But I found my place when I got my master's, which I had been diagnosed again. So I had had 2 brain tumors. And there was this little man, he looked like his hair was like Einstein. He looked like his finger in the light socket. And I was like, so what are you doing these days? He's like, well, I'm a substitute teacher. I was like, good Lord, if they'll let you in, they'll let me. Right? So I became a school teacher in special education, and that's what started my journey. So I ended up here as a disability director after K through 12 as a special ed teacher, disability director at a university.
Fantastic. Thank you. We also have with us Cordney McClain. He completed his undergraduate work in business communications before finishing a master's in business administration from Ashford University. When Cordney isn't advocating for an inclusive, equitable experience for his students, he works as an educator in financial literacy, diversity, and inclusion, and project management, and he also mentors for the Oklahoma City Police Department Juvenile Outreach Program. He has spent over a decade in mentorship and professional development, and he sits on the board for both the STAR Foundation at Metro Tech and the Black Male Initiative at the University of Central Oklahoma. He is a veteran of the Oklahoma Army National Guard, co-founder of Brothers for Progress, founder of Mac Woods Incorporated, an author and spoken word artist, and was just featured in the film Black Wall Street Burning, which premiered in Tulsa in February, just before the COVID outbreak. Cordney, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be here this morning.
You clearly don't fit into one box, so can you tell us your multifaceted story that led you to your current role in public service? How did you cultivate a career advocating for and creating diversity, inclusion, and equity?
All right, man, that's a loaded question. That's a loaded question, but I'll stick with the diversity and inclusion. So coming through Dale City, I grew up on the south side of Oklahoma City. I went to Dale City High School, and then when I graduated and went to OU, I looked back at Dale City as, well, I always thought it was diverse. You know, I always was around brown people, Hispanic. On the south side, you're going to be around Hispanics. And then I felt like I went to school from Parkview to Dale Crest to Dale City around a lot of white kids as well. So I thought I came from a diverse background. Until I showed up as a freshman on the campus of University of Oklahoma, and I said, wow, it's a lot of white people here. And I went through cultural shock. I had never been around that many white people, and I did not know how I was going to fare around that many white people because it was brand new for me, right? So the very first day we're moving in, and if you ever moved in on a college campus, it's very, very active. You have students, you have parents, you have family, you know, all moving in on usually a bright, pretty day, right? So me and I told a couple of my homies to come down and help me move, and I'll feed them, right? So that was the motivation. They came down and helped me, and while we're moving in, we get on the way up to my room, making one of many of the trips to move in. We walk in an elevator with a little petite young white girl, and she has this big fish bowl with a lot of different, you know, all the different pebbles and all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And I assume she's from a rural area because when I spoke to her, I said hello like my mother taught me when you walk into a space to speak. She says hello back, but she sounds very country, right? So when the doors close, it's her, myself, and 4 of my friends, all black young men. Mm-hmm. She starts shaking. She's like she's terrified. She's terrified. I don't know if she's just never been around. So I assume where she come from. Maybe she's never been around too many black people, which I learned later that a lot of my students had never been around black people. So she's shaking, right? She's shaking, and it's funny then, but it's still kind of funny now. But but when we get off, one of my friends turns around and says, "Boo!"
Oh my gosh!
She drops the fish tank, and pebbles and stuff go everywhere, and we're laughing to the point where like, that's what you get because you shouldn't have been afraid of us. Now as a grown man, I'm like, okay, yeah, he shouldn't have did that. But that was my first lesson before classes even started on the campus of OU, that I was going to be judged by the color of my skin before they even knew anything about me. And that was in fall 2003. So, I always tell that story because I had never before then really took my color into context of people would judge me by it. Not too much. I mean, we used to get pulled over by police here and there in Dale City, but for the most part, we knew the police officers that was in our neighborhood. So it didn't happen too often, but to walk on the campus and go through that before classes even started, and then different instances happened throughout my college career at OU in my undergrad. So I'm seeing these different things. I remember being dressed up in a polo, khakis with my book bag on, walking down the North Oval, and a white girl damn near jumped into the bushes trying to get away from me. I'm coming from work on my way to my Spanish evening course. Multiple different things like these happen. And I'm a little bigger now. I've been hitting the weights as an adult man, but then I was a skinny kid. Why are you afraid of me? In a polo and some khakis. So just diving into the fact that people just aren't aware, and not even ignorant in a bad context, but ignorant in just they're unaware. They don't know. Leading into me really wanting to educate people. My junior year, I was in an African American Studies course. A young white lady from a rural area at OU, she asked this question. We have historically black universities. Why we don't have any historically white universities? She asked this sitting in OU. Everybody turned around and looked at her crazy, and some people were mad about it. But you could tell on her face she was authentic in her question. She just really didn't know. And I'll never forget Miss Stale, Dr. Stale. She said to her, "Well, baby, you sitting in one." And that made me be like, you know what? I'm not going to be angry with you if you just don't know. I'll educate you. And that was a young Cordney at 19, just understanding that some people just don't know. So as I got older, D&I came in. I was introduced to D&I, the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2015. One of my best friends opened the department within Price College of Business, Dr. Kenneth Chapman. When he opened it in 2015, I had never been introduced to it before. Before then, I was doing community outreach and stuff like that, but I had never knew this was a type of career you could have. So then, at that time, I'm working in corporate America, and I said, man, I hate my job. I would love to do that, though. So I create this whole business case, and I present it to the company. I don't want to front them out, but I present it to the company that I was working for, and they just beat around the bush. They really wasn't interested. They gave me a whole bunch of different outreach type of opportunities, basically spinning my wheels until I was like, you know what? I love this work. I'm going to just keep pushing. And then I just kept saying yes to every opportunity to go speak, going to black male conferences, teaching when I wasn't getting paid for it, using my sick leave and my vacation leave at my corporate job to fuel my passion. And then when the time came, I just got the call. And it really wasn't even an interview. And now I'm the director of diversity and inclusion for Price College at OU. And it was a blessing because God really just shifted me in that range, in that environment, to be in the right place at the right time. But it was me saying yes to opportunity, just continuing to say yes.
I love that. Thank you for that. And if you didn't think that having two local superstars wasn't enough, we also brought in Executive Director for CAIR of Oklahoma, Adam Soltani. Adam completed his undergraduate work in sociology from UCO before finishing his master's work in human relations with an emphasis on organizational diversity and development from OU. His efforts have been recognized nationwide as a recipient of the 2014 Oklahoma Human Rights Award, the 2015 Interfaith Leadership Award, the 2015 Civil Libertarian of the Year Award, and this year being recognized as one of the 50 most powerful young professionals in Oklahoma City, alongside such names as Stephen Adams, Chris Paul, and Abigail Ogle. Welcome, Adam. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be here. Your work in the community didn't start with running one of the largest community partners in Oklahoma. You once managed American Muslim artists for a London-based record label, served as the Assistant Director for Outreach for the Islamic Society of Greater Oklahoma City, and even served as a state employee for the Department of Human Services, among a slew of board memberships with agencies such as the Interfaith Alliance of Oklahoma, the Islamic Society of Greater Oklahoma City Executive Committee, and the Oklahoma chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. Where did your journey start, and what intentional steps did you take that led you to your current role?
Well, thank you for having me. I think my journey started when I was born. I was born in 1983, and my father had immigrated from Iran in 1978, right before the Iranian Revolution. My mother is white, and she's from Olathe, Kansas. So I was born into a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith home. So I say my journey started when I was born. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was born and raised in Kansas. And if you've been to Kansas, it's not that diverse of a place, I just didn't know that. I thought it was normal growing up, going to school, that, and the thing is, I look white, right? Visibly, I look that way, but I knew deep down inside I was different. So I thought it was normal to have one other person in the class I could relate to. It was the other black kid or the Hispanic kid, or even the individual with special needs, somebody that was different, that didn't fit in. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the moment I knew I was different, because I grew up going to Catholic school, kindergarten through second grade. My father being from Iran, he was Muslim, or still is, I should say. And, they did something in one of my elementary school classes when I entered public school that was something I don't think you can do these days. Maybe you shouldn't have even done it at that time, but they asked what your religion was, right? Mm-hmm. And even though I went to Catholic school and my mother was Catholic growing up, and I went to church with her from time to time, I didn't feel like I fit into one box. And so I was the only person who said, no, I don't know what my religion is. So I was the one who fit in the other category. And I think that's the moment I realized that there's something different about who I am. And it took me a long time to really put all these pieces of the puzzle together, but I grew up in this atmosphere where people disliked me. And because of who my father was. And it almost led me to have some deeply embedded animosity towards my own father, because I felt like I didn't fit in because of him. I'm like, why did you do this to me? Why can't I just be like my white friends, Yeah. And so at age of 17, after a few years of spiritual journey, if you will, I embraced Islam as my religion. And that was in the late 90s. Of course, 9/11 happened not long after that. And when I embraced Islam, for me, it was like, finally, I have found what I was looking for. And it wasn't like some thing that made me much more different than who I had become at that point. It was just, in America, we have the freedom of religion. That's what we're told. I made a choice. Right. But then 9/11 happened. And I always say that's the day I went from being an American to being an American Muslim. That became an identifier that I had to apply to myself. And nothing, made that more apparent than one day, me and my friend, his name is Omer. He now lives in Pakistan, but he was 6'7", tall guy, went to UCO. Everybody knew him on campus because he stood out, brown skin, accent, 6'7". That's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And we used to go to the mosque in Edmond, which is right across from the football stadium. And we were cheap college students. So we knew at halftime, after halftime, you can get in free. At least back in the day, you could. Yeah. And we had a friend who played for Norman North football. So we said, let's go check out the game. So we did. We went and enjoyed the second half of the game. We're walking back to the mosque where we parked our car. And a group of white teenagers pulled by in a pickup truck. And they yelled to my friend, hey, send go back home. I had never heard the term before. Yeah. Right? I didn't even know what it meant. Like, this was completely new to me. Yeah. Now, my friend was mad, And what does he do? He takes off on foot after the truck. Of course, he didn't catch up to him. But that was a huge turning point for me. I had never, I felt like I had been marginalized and not embraced because of some differences I had. But that was the first time I felt hate truly projected towards me for something I chose according to what the country told me I could do. The United States, you can choose. You can choose whatever religion you want. I chose, but now I'm not in a good place. And so that really started my journey, and started getting involved with my community, doing whatever I could to build bridges of understanding and tolerance. And I think a lot of my work with the interfaith community before I joined CAIR or Council on American Islamic Relations really helped the stage for this understanding of what it means to work with diversity, inclusion, and equity. You've seen the bumper sticker, coexist. And that, I think, was the understanding I initially had. We want to create this country, this state, this country where we can coexist. my friend, Dr. Noel Jacobs, he taught me a new term, which is beyond coexistence. He said to coexist is to tolerate, right?
Right.
We can coexist with each other, but we don't have to like each other. He said we have to move beyond that. And that's really what, to me, diversity, inclusion, and equity is all about. It's not just, we have to live together. We don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Laws require that we do certain things. But it's that we move beyond that to where we actually embrace one another. We come to understand each other. We come to respect each other. We don't have to love each other.
Yeah.
And I tell people that you don't have to like me, but you better respect me, right? Because I'm gonna demand that of you. So that's really my journey. And for the last 8.5 years, I worked for the Council on American Islamic Relations, and we've really worked to establish this understanding that Islam is nothing foreign to America. It's been around for more than 400 years.
Right.
In fact, today is Indigenous Peoples Day. Right. Mm-hmm. And we're recording this podcast on this day. And I think it's fitting to mention that it was actually the white slave owners that brought not only black people to this country, but brought Islam to this country, because 10 to 15% of the slaves that were brought over were Muslim. Right. And so I think it's working with CAIR Oklahoma. It has taught me that we have to educate people about the reality of the history of our country. And the fight for belonging is an uphill battle. And there is no more truth to that than if you look at what we have done in trying to establish Muslim Day at the Capitol, right? An event that we established in 2015, but yet has seen protesters, has seen legislators who have tried to stop it, right? I mean, there is no more fundamental right for Americans than to be able to be involved in our government, right? That's like the core of what America is all about. Mm-hmm. Yet we literally had people who are elected to power, white people, and we had protesters, all white people, who tried to stop us from practicing our fundamental rights as American citizens just because of our faith. So there's a lot more that can be said, but, my journey to being involved with diversity, inclusion, and equity has been a very personal journey. And for the last few years, I've been blessed with the opportunity to be involved with the Oklahoma City Inclusion and Diversity Consortium as a sponsor and be able to really give my input as to the direction we're going to be able to head with that. I really have been very happy to see the progress we've made, even though there's still a long ways to go. But it starts with a conversation, and I think we're there now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Historically, higher education and organizations in both the private and public sectors have viewed diversity, inclusion, and equity through the lens of race, class, religion, and gender. Along with your one-step best practice model, Tabitha, you teach that sharing family stories with disability and their impact will begin opening doors to inclusion. How is inclusion defined in your realm beyond the scope of these common demographics?
Thank you. That's a great question. What is interesting to me in my journey when I listen to all the lingos about building bridges and equity and justice, what a lot of us don't know what that is until you're put in that position, right? Until you get sick and now you are defined as different, or that you come into a community where they've never seen you before. What is that? How do I deal with that? There's a lot of fear. And that piqued my interest incredibly. I wanted to know, okay, we're all people. We're all, we have the human experience. Cut us open, we're all the same, right? And we have core values, whether, it's a virtuous person, universal themes. We've got these common threads that tie us together. Why is it so hard to get along? And how can we connect? At what thread can I connect with you, right? So that piques my interest. What I found so interesting as I started this journey was understanding civil rights and the different platforms, and everybody was speaking their own voice. They were all siloed. And I thought, how can, as corporate America starts hiring diversity and inclusive officers, how can we stay siloed, right? Because in companies, they're creating these strategic designs to mitigate and to build bridges, but they're creating affinity groups, right? For their voice to be heard in that place. And we didn't think about you, the international, and we didn't think about you, the race, and we didn't think about you, the gender. I have no idea what event you're holding, and I'm not learning. Why is that? Because we're not really building bridges when it boils down to it. And what it really boils down to is we're not practicing inclusion. in my head. That's, I just see everyone siloed, everyone screaming loudly, the loudest one gets heard. But, and I don't mean that in any derogatory sense at all, because your win is my win.
Right.
Because we're fighting the same injustice. We're fighting the same systems and the structures that oppress and deny us opportunities to access or to opportunity. It's the same system and the same structure. So I found that very interesting. And then when I kept going, I noticed that, yes, we're all siloed, but here's a common thread. Disability is no respecter of persons. Your mama could have diabetes. You could have a certain, you could get in a car accident, right? You could have a child with special needs, right? You could get cancer and then get rid of it, but, maybe there's some lasting effects. Maybe you have someone who's addicted in your family. Well, federal law, the American Disabilities Act, is a law that protects. It gives us opportunity, it demands interactive dialogue with companies and institutions of learning. And it's not compliance so bad. It's about access to learning and to work. And it demands that those two structures or those institutions have an interactive dialogue to talk before you get fired or pushed out. So what I thought was very interesting was that thread that unites us all, which is disability. And what's interesting is somehow, some way, the American Disabilities Act in 1990, though it's defined, they never pointed to that central critical issue is that it's the human condition. It's the human experience. Hopefully you won't have anything significant, but you're still going to have something that's going to get in the way of your learning, right? Whether you're taking medicine, you don't feel great today, COVID-19, anxiety and depression in the heavens. It has affected all of us, regardless of any of our platforms, right? And yet, disability in and of itself is the last thing anyone wants to talk about. It's the last thing anybody wants to say I have. Even if they did understand that it is a little disabling, they're not going to identify with it. Right? There's so much stigma in the culture, and there's historically, people with disabilities during wartime get killed. Why? They have no value. I just talked to a guy at the UN, and I was like, so what have you been dealing with? Oh, well, with COVID-19, when they were talking about the ventilators. The real issue was everyone's freaking out. Who's going to get the ventilator? Who's the most important? It's kind of like triage. I get that. But at the end of the day, people with disabilities were going, oh, yeah, your life looks really sad. Little prayer, hope it works out for you, but we need that. Right?
Gotcha.
Right? And what if that is your kid? What if your Down syndrome neighbor is perfectly healthy? The neighborhood loves that child, and yet, he got sick, he's in the hospital, unfortunate, and they just took it, right? So where do you put value? How do you put value on a person? Well, people with disabilities and someone in authority is taking that away. So my point is, how do we come together? I'm saying that disability intersects all of us because it's the human condition, it's the human experience. And my question is, why do we deny that? Why is it negated? Why is there so much discrimination and stigma attached? Because when I get you for 5 minutes to talk to me about your family, I'll hear disability in 5 minutes. 5 minutes, I'll hear it. It's just that people don't identify with it. But yet, 5 minutes and you're on my page. And that's because it's the human condition. So I love the topic of disability inclusion because it is a beginning to be a bridge to connect your silo to my silo. Because when you're sick, I know how to treat you. That's funny to me how people don't pay attention to that. But when you've gone through something, when you've been sick or you know somebody who's got some issues, what does inclusion look like? It's, how are you today? Can I bring you something? I'm running to the store. You're older, right? The elderly population, they have tons of disability now, right? But we don't see them as disabled. But that inclusion begins by identifying with our elderly and saying, what can I do for you? I just wanted to check in. And then with our young people, their anxiety is so high, just checking in, how are you?
Oh, yeah.
You know, how's school going? And they'll tell you it's hard, right? But I've just built that inclusion because I checked in. I just built that inclusion when I asked your story. And there's that, and I'm not sure who coined it, but it's diversity is inviting all the different people, and inclusion is making sure that they dance, right?
Right.
Okay,
right.
I can't stand that statement, and this is why. It's because a lot of people can't get to your party, right? So if you want to talk about poverty, right? So if you're poor, you have you don't have good health care. If you're poor, you don't have enough money to buy good, nutritious food for your child to learn and be optimal in their learning, right? And so there's this, they've been oppressed and we put them there and they're doing the best they can, but they can't get far and they can't buy the gas to get to your party. And then you've got the people with disability, the autistic kid who's highly sensitive to hearing and noise. And you've got this blaring music. You excluded them. It's not that they weren't wanting to come. You excluded them because you didn't take the time to ask your story, check in with you, get your opinion, get your thoughts. And then a lot of people can't dance. Right? A lot of people can't dance. That's what they say. But what about our veterans with PTSD?
Yeah.
Do they want to come to your loud party? No, they're too worried about what's going on behind them, right?
Yeah.
The anxiety, their anxiety's in the heavens. They don't have time for your party.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me, but. And then you sit there and preach inclusion and dancing, all of us getting along when you haven't even talked to me and you didn't even take the time. And I always say love and care and time is money. It takes time, and this is why I think corporate America has this internal struggle, and people have an internal struggle, because I'd have to take the time to go over and care enough to listen to your story, and time is money.
Oh, yeah.
And I have an agenda, right? And so it's not that we're bad people, it's just our values are off, I think, and I haven't experienced everything. And as a disability director, I'm always messing up on accommodations. I'm like, I always, and that's my profession. So I'm not going to hold you to this very high standard. It's just people getting along. And so what does inclusion look like for me? Inclusion looks like when I can sit with my hairdresser. Yesterday, she's black. I'm 4'9", and she's got to be 6'6". And we can sit there and have these conversations on how do you create inclusion? What is best practice? Why are we struggling? And I can totally mess up and say something completely inappropriate in a room full of people. But to her, she's like, sister, let me tell you, that was just so wrong, or let me give you the real deal. And that's where we have to get in corporate and in our homes, is creating a safe place where we can have these conversations, mess up, not get annihilated, and not get screamed at. So if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got the physiological, just your basic food, water, shelter, right? So when we go and talk about poverty, we've got people who those basic needs aren't met. Don't talk to me about
actualization,
being authentic or finding belonging. They're just trying to survive.
Right.
And then you've got that next layer, and that next layer is safety. So when we talk about people's safety, right, if Black Lives Matter, and I've never seen a Black person, and then I hear that you're getting together with your friends, right? Oh my God, what is that, right?
Right.
And you want me to perform my job? Really? I don't even know what to do with that. And if corporate America can create safe places, if homes can create safe places to mess up or to have those difficult conversations, that, my friends, is where I believe it's a good first step for building inclusion and building bridges and it begins with sharing our stories.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you for that, Tabitha. I appreciate it. We all know that food is one of the great things that bring people together. So let's start there. The Oklahoma Gazette reported in 2015 that Oklahoma is now home to 28 halal restaurants, 11 halal markets, 16 halal caterers. But there are also 10 mosques and 2 Muslim-based private institutions for K through 12 students. Adam, you use your outreach to serve the arts community as the chair for the Oklahoma Conference of Churches Religious United Committee and planning committee member for Oklahoma City's Jewish Muslim Film Institute. Can we talk for a minute about the contributions the Muslim community has made, not only to the metro area, but to the state of Oklahoma as a whole in terms of community partnership, economic development, and public service?
Absolutely. I think before I even get to that, I think people need to shift the way they've understood Muslims historically in America and in the world. A lot of people don't realize, because of this overwhelming atmosphere of anti-Muslim hate and Islamophobia that's been in America for 19 years, especially post 9/11, that Muslims have contributed to civilization for more than 1,400 years. Right. The coffee we had this morning, was created by Muslims in, I believe, Yemen, in the 7th century. Eyeglasses, the concept of ophthalmology, came from a Muslim inventor. Even algebra, which I know most people don't like. I'm not a math person, but came from an Arab Muslim named Al-Jaber. That was his name. That's where the term came from, Awesome. And so I think people need to shift their understanding, because what we have right now in America, and you can find, the reports online, is that terrorism, acts of violence committed by somebody who claims to be Muslim, and I always say claims to be Muslim, because you're not Muslim or Christian or Jew or whatever if you're committing an act of violence. You are committing a satanic act, right? You're following the devil in committing that evil, that sin. So at that moment, you're not a believer. You can't be a believer in God and kill innocent people. So acts of terrorism that are committed by people who claim to be Muslim get 357% more media coverage than acts of domestic terrorism committed by white people in America. That's a huge problem. Yeah. That has created this issue where Muslims are automatically in America looked at through a very negative lens, right? Just like black people have for a long time in this country, right? When people think of black people, because of the news, the media, popular culture, hip hop. Gangbanger, hip hop is beautiful music. I love hip hop. I was listening to Lupe Fiasco on the way here, right? But they get this negative connotation: gangster rap, right? Loud cars, guns, drugs,
danger,
over sexualized,
right? I'm reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And I have learned so much from that about the different ways in which, even when you break down racism, it fits into different categories, even the racism as it's projected on the body of the black man. Right. It's just a book that everybody needs to read. But getting back to my point is that Muslims have contributed to society and civilization for more than 1,400 years, right? So when you look at Oklahoma, well, I mentioned before, in America, Muslims came here 400 years ago, not by choice. They were forced to come to America. And so we have to understand that Islam has been in America even before the United States was a country, number one. Number two, Muslims have been in Oklahoma for more than 50 years, with the founding of Masjid Mu'min, which is on Northeast 23rd Street, east of the Capitol. It was originally founded as a Nation of Islam temple. And so Muslims have been here for a long time. We're not new to this state. It's not like we just came over yesterday, And Muslims have been doing things like building houses, engineers. I have a Muslim friend who's originally from Libya that was the head of the engineering department for one of the Oklahoma agencies that built most of the bridges in Oklahoma. Muslims have contributed in so many ways, whether it be economic, whether it be, social, through academia. There are so many Muslim professors in academics in Oklahoma, even in the social realm, right? For 10 years, actually, this is supposed to be our 10th year anniversary of having our Ramadan Day of Service. It's a day we started 10 years ago with about 20, 30 kids, Muslim kids, that we said, okay, during our holy month of Ramadan, when we're not eating or drinking from sunup to sundown, as an act of obedience to God, let's go package food for people in need, so we can fulfill part of our faith, which is to serve humanity. Mm-hmm. And that grew from 20 young people to over 300 adults and children that come every year to the regional food bank. And that's kind of acted as a catalyst to get people more involved in the community and community service. Unfortunately, this year with COVID, we weren't able to have our big 10-year anniversary celebration. But that's just one example of way Muslims have served the community. A few years ago, we established Mercy Food Pantry at the Islamic Society of Greater Oklahoma City. And that became one of the fastest growing food pantries in the state of Oklahoma that serves over 700 people every week throughout the Oklahoma City metro area. So Muslims have been involved for so long. And I really would encourage listeners to shift the way you think about people. Challenge yourself. If the first thought that comes to your mind, and I do this when I speak to audience, I say, give me the first thing that comes to your mind when I say Islam or Muslims. It's okay if it's bad, right? If the first word that comes to your mind is terrorist, if the first word that comes to your mind is jihad, if the first thought that comes to your mind is 9/11, then you've got a problem, right? Because there are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world's second largest religion, fastest growing religion in America. And if all you think of is something negative, that's okay. I understand why, but you need to challenge yourself to think differently.
Let's talk about equity. Cordney, what does equity look like in the modern workspace? And what strategies have you identified as being most successful to your organization in creating an equitable work culture, both in the physical and virtual workspaces?
Kind of piggybacking off of what Tabitha has said earlier, like when people talk about diversity, it's the new thing. It's sexy right now, right? But diversity is very cosmetic. It's just what the website looks like for corporate America, or that's what the pamphlets look like. They want it brown, and they may have a child in a wheelchair or something like that. They're really playing off of the stigma that everybody's included in the picture. So when you talk about equity, I'd rather people stop talking about diversity. We need to talk about inclusion, and we need to talk about equity. And I have an example similar to the party, as in, what if I invite everybody in here to a barbecue? All y'all can come to a barbecue to my house. But then once you get to my house, I treat you like crap. And so that's what I very much seen in corporate America as, I had the blessing to be in these good spaces where I'm making decent income, but I'm not getting the same promotion rates as other people. I'm not getting the same opportunities to present to executives. I'm not getting the same opportunities to travel to present to other executives that will be very influential to my my annual review. Like all these different type of opportunities I'm not seeing that I'm getting, but I'm doing the same work and doing it pretty damn good as my white counterparts, but I'm not getting those same opportunities. So then if it's not about race, then what is it about? What is it about then? And I'm asking my supervisor why I'm not getting these same opportunities. Then they say, oh, well, we want to put you on this type, and that's going to set you up for that opportunity. Okay, I do it. Now what? Yeah. I've already executed. I've executed well. You gave me kudos on it. Other management have given me kudos on my my execution skills. So now where do we go from there? So if the diversity pool is increasing, I'm seeing more black counterparts. I'm seeing more women getting these different opportunities as well. But none of us is getting promoted, and none of us is getting the same. Because I'll ask people. You came in making what? Because we'll end up talking about it. I mean, people don't like to talk about income, but it comes up, especially when you work close with somebody. It comes up, right. And then when it comes up, and you're looking at your white counterpart, like, you make what? And I've been here twice as long as you. I've been on this. I've been doing this. I'm a subject matter expert. People call me for certain things. So when all of that comes in, then you're like, okay, then it has to be about race. It has to be about race because nothing else is adding up. So when I talk about equity, an example I give is, if I have a house full of people and they're all starving, then I have a wall full of food, but I want to be diverse. I want to be equal. Then the best thing is to just give you all the same thing. So I'm going to give I'm going to pick up these peanuts. And I'm going to give everybody peanuts because I want to be equal. But what if 60% of y'all got a peanut allergy? It makes no sense. The equality makes no sense anymore. So we got to get away from diversity. We got to get away from equality. It's about equity. Equity is looking at that particular person, like you spoke on, Tabitha, and talk about what is good for that person. And even if I'm a black male that has this particular type of experience or what have you, I might come from a particular background that doesn't really push me into getting the experience that you really want on my resume. But you can tell I can do the job. I've had conversations with leadership saying that, oh, well, Cordney, we want to hire more Black employees, but they can't eloquently state that they have the experience. Oh, but you can look at their resume and tell they have the experience. We talked about military earlier. Had a very dynamic gentleman from the military, been in the Navy for a while. They didn't hire him because he couldn't eloquently state what he could do. But you see the resume. The resume is thick. Is crazy. But at the same time, you say that he can't give you out of his mouth that he can do the job. What that plays into the equity of, you don't know his experience. You don't know his background. Because you want to get real, a lot of the white students that I mentors to, their background is totally different from a young Hispanic kid from the south side of Oklahoma City, where I'm from. So they didn't grow up with being around doctors. They didn't grow up being around entrepreneurs, businessmen since they were about 7. But then again, their white counterparts, same age, they've been around that for a long time. They understand stocks, they understand bonds, they understand ownership, they understand LLCs, they understand those type of deals. So when they're put in that position to sit down with some doctors or donors or such at an early age, at 19, they're comfortable. They're comfortable. But that's a different base. Even when I speak to professors about, one professor told me, well, a lot of the Black students that I come across, they just don't have the critical thinking ability. I said, wow. I said, well, you're basing this on someone that's been having a computer since they were 6, doing computer programming on the side. Their father does computer programming for a Fortune 500 company, whatever. You're comparing that experience now to a person who is interested, but from an impoverished area. Now he's interested in MIS, but he doesn't have the background. So you can't say that he doesn't have the critical thinking. He can't do it. It's just he doesn't have the experience to think like how you want him to think. So with the equity, you just have to dive into what is best for that particular person. I'll give you another example in my line of work. A $1,000 scholarship to a student, if one comes from an affluent background, the other comes from an impoverished background, that 1,000 doesn't do anything for that person from an impoverished background. That 1,000 doesn't do anything. The one from the affluent background, that might buy some books. He might pocket that money. He might pocket that money because he comes from a affluent background. His education is probably already paid for or being paid for by somebody with a lot of money, But the person from, like I said, the young Hispanic boy from South Side Oklahoma City, that 1,000 may cover the books, but how is his tuition being paid? How is the rest of, because that bursar bill is a beast. How is the bursar being paid? You have to look at every student by their own situation, and that's when equity starts pouring in. Even when they get to corporate America, you have to still look at it the same way. And if you try to treat everybody in this, I hate the term melting pot, because then when everything is in the melting pot, you go to gumbo. My Aunt Belle makes some bomb gumbo. You start putting everything in, everything loses its individual taste. So you have to respect everybody's contribution, and you don't do that when you put it in a melting pot. And I think that's an initial issue that a lot of these historically racist institutions have been applying to their diversity initiative. Right. They want everything to be in a melting pot. You can't respect somebody's talents and gifts from an Islamic point of view, or from a disabled point of view, from a woman's point of view, from a Black Hispanic. You can't do that when you're just trying to mesh everything together. That's one reason I do appreciate affinity groups, but like you said, you gotta find that bridge as well, so all the affinity groups can work together and understand each other's equity within respective affinity groups.
Wow, so much that we've discussed already throughout this podcast. I am so really excited about this information, because one of the common threads in what we've talked about is the need for discussion, the need to create safe spaces for conversation so that the information can be disseminated, and then we can do something differently. We can do something about it. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the goals that we have for bringing forth this information in this platform is to shift the conversation from what mainstream is saying it is to what it really is, why it's really important, why it affects all of us. It's not just about race and gender, as it's more commonly understood, it's a bigger picture than that. It's a picture about making sure that things are equitable and that everyone has a place of belonging, that everyone's voice matters. So let's talk about, Tabitha, specifically for you, the idea of intersectionality as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And actually, before I ask that question, I also want to say, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity is just the first step. And I want us to talk about this as well. Diversity is the first step. It's the demographic. It's the numbers.
Right.
It's the About Us page that shows that we are multicultural.
It's the easy part.
It's the easy part. It's the step one.
It's the step one that we should have been doing in the first place. Like even when it comes to hiring practices for corporate America, if you are in a space, you're supposed to be intentionally hiring people around them where you put your big building. So a lot of times you'll see corporate America bring a space in and then they're hiring outsourcing, but then they're not providing opportunities for the people that's actually in the community. The diversity, you're bringing people in from the community now, but are you allowing them the same benefits as other people?
Right.
Or do they get the same advantages? Do they get the same type of promotion rates?
Right.
And what do their promotions look like?
Right.
Like discussing that, that's past the diversity, because the diversity is the easy part.
Right.
Right.
So in the world of diversity, because again, that's just step one. And we have inclusion, we have equity, we have belonging, we have these different steps. There's even a model, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But the challenge, one of the major challenges with diversity alone and stopping at that step is intersectionality. Tabitha, I want to start with you. Talk to me about intersectionality and what you see and what that means.
There's 8 billion people in the world. 1 billion have disability, at least identify. And that's not including those with invisible disabilities, which is mental health, mental impairments, depression, anxiety, veterans with PTSD. Let's talk about childhood trauma in the world of psychology. Let's talk about the opioid addiction. Let's talk about human trafficking. Let's just talk about COVID-19. Let's talk about the diverse room we have here and our stories. Right? So when I talk to you about that, basically what the federal government has done is they're not bad. They have stamped something that is beautiful for Americans, which is you need to have an interactive dialogue, which is what we just said we need to have happening. And then they said, we want to ensure that whether you're in corporate America, in a business with 15 people or more, or whether you're at an institution of learning, that you need to make sure that when your mental health is struggling, when you're sick and you get a diagnosis, when mental impairments or physical things happen, that you've got something in America that's going to have your back. It's going to protect you. And it's that interactive dialogue. So the minute you walk in and disclose, hey, I'm not doing well, here's why, that institution or that workplace has to talk to you. And so when we talk about intersectionality, I really get fired up because I keep telling people it's everyone. And if it's not you now, praise God. Right? But it's your neighbor, it's your mama, and it's your friends across the world, and now we're globally connected, right? So you don't not know someone, and you are not exempt from having that. It's going to happen.
Even when we all get older, that age start affecting. And then you span over from now I'm just a black male to now I'm a black male with diabetes.
And go back to corporate America. So now we've got how many generations in the business? Right, you've got Gen Z, you've got the millennials, you've got the baby boomers, right? You've got all these generations there, and they're all in that some place in the human development where disability happens, whether it's mental or physical. So the intersectionality, taking it a little different than what I said before, is we're all connected to disability. I'm hoping to normalize the word and bring us back to a place of the human condition and loving us as humanity. At the end of the day, we're all human and we're all experiencing physical or mental impairments that substantially limit one or more life activities, right? And it's just a different perspective. And I'm just really trying to push people around that. And when we talk about intersectionality, I want to go back to what you said earlier, and you were talking about overt discrimination, someone calling you something. And in the world of disability, and go back to thinking all the people, right? All of us. It's so interesting, these microaggressions. And going back to what you're saying, like, really, Tammy over there has been here 2 years and you're giving her optimal training. You're sending her, and I've been here 10 years making the same amount of money, right? And I'm not getting trained. Can you talk to me about why? You know, and someone once said, if it looks like a fish and smells like a fish, it's probably a fish, right? Right. And so I don't know. Who do I get to have that conversation with in a safe place? And are our managers trained? And we talked about diversity and inclusion have to start from the top. And
because it has to be a cultural cultivation.
But they act like they're not us. It's them.
Right.
It's you. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. I'm going to pray for you and hope that works out. Right. But I'm talking about you. It's you.
It's all of us.
It's all of us.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add one little quick thing on intersectionality and from a quirky perspective. We think in America of the American Disabilities Act, 504 Rehabilitation Act. When you think of the world and you think of other countries, they have handled disability and have disability law, or they don't. I wanted to just intersect to the UN and to Sustainable Development Goals. And I don't think a lot of people hear about that. I don't think they think globally. Like, there are leaders in the world talking about what? Oh, they have 17 goals. About what? You know? And we're so focused on our little world, yet the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN and big leaders and global leaders are having these conversations, and 2 of those 17 goals deal with disability.
Wow.
It intersects to about 8 others, which brings to question, again, poverty, the cycle of poverty, the lack of health care, the lack of nutrition, the oppressed states, right? And so I'm trying to give a new understanding of intersectionality and how we are connected, and that these conversations are essential and we can grow from them.
Absolutely.
Wow. If I could kind of give a different perspective, I think of diversity and intersectionality on different terms, because my background is community service, nonprofit organizations. And when I think of diversity, the term I use to explain to people is, for an organization, whether it's a government entity or a nonprofit entity, to serve the community, it has to be a reflection of the community it serves. And the problem is, historically and today, that's not the case. Oklahoma itself is much more diverse than that, historically and today, right? And so same thing. When I talk to nonprofits, I sometimes consult for other nonprofits, for boards and staff, and I say, if you want to serve a diverse community, which most nonprofits want to do, you have to be a reflection of that diversity. And don't just bring people on to be the token Black person or the token Muslim or the token Hispanic. Actually bring them on for the value they bring and provide them the same seat at the table that you have, right? And my friend at the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, he always tells me, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. Right. And that's how you make sure that you incorporate all the concepts of diversity, inclusion, and equity. You got to allow room for everybody to be at the table. Otherwise, they're on the menu.
Thank you for joining us. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Certified Public Manager Program, a nationally accredited, cohort-based leadership program that transforms public service professionals within their management careers. To find out more, visit learn.ok.gov. Until next time, keep on learning.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during this podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Southern Nazarene University, the University of Oklahoma, the Council on American Islamic Relations, or the Office of Management and Enterprise Services.